Okay, so when you think of the Miami Dolphins, one singular man comes to mind. Daniel Constantine Marino Jr., the best player in their franchise's history, at one time the proud holder of seemingly every quarterbacking record there was, and tragically the only consistent quarterback the Dolphins have had over the last 40 years. So hey, if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's strap in, and for all you Miami fans out there, viewer discretion is advised, as we are going to go on a very long and painful journey to look at what happened to all 25 quarterbacks that started for the Miami Dolphins after Dan Marino, and how pretty much none of them came even close to Dan Marino's success. First, in order to truly appreciate the suckitude of the men after Marino, let me quickly bring you up to speed on who Dan Marino was as a quarterback, and believe it or not, he was actually pretty good, and after sliding to the 27th overall pick due to allegedly loving powdered sugar a little too much, that allowed the AFC champion Miami Dolphins to swoop him up for one of the biggest draft steals in NFL history, and immediately, it didn't take long for Marino to get to work, leading the Dolphins to a Super Bowl appearance in just his second season, and even more impressively, he didn't get caught doing coke either. But then, after failing to get the help around him he needed and consistently coming up short, after 17 years in Miami, Dan Marino finally retired after the 1999 season as a surefire first-ballot Hall of Famer. But before he ascended to the football afterlife, just to add one more thing, just for some flavor, in his last game ever as the quarterback of the Dolphins, Dan Marino played one of the worst games of his entire life, losing to the Jacksonville Jaguars in the divisional round 62-7, and without Dan around, things got dark immediately. Because after that Jaguars loss, not only did Dan Marino retire, leaving the Dolphins organization with a crater-sized hole in the quarterback position, but their head coach Jimmy Johnson also resigned from his position, and with that much uncertainty surrounding the team before the 2000 season, nobody expected anything other than an excruciating, painful first year of a rebuild. So, year number one without their world-class actor Dan Marino began, and Miami first started out by immediately filling the head coaching spot with their current assistant head coach / defensive coordinator, Dave Wanstead, and made it obvious that the front office, led by general manager Eddie Jones, really had absolutely no plan whatsoever for the quarterback position moving forward, as they decided to throw some money at a career backup in former Jags quarterback Jay Fiedler to compete for the starting job against Marino's backup in 1999, a previous undrafted free agent named Damon Huard, who actually started 5 games in 1999 and had a very respectable record of 4-1 as the starting quarterback. Now with that, this little quarterback battle, or it's not even fair to call it that. What this was really just whichever guy would piss off the coach less would probably just get the starting quarterback job. Because after a grueling training camp and an unwatchable preseason, even after seeing Huard have the position in the palms of his gloves, and after Fiedler got arthroscopic surgery in August, and threw 3 interceptions and 0 touchdowns in the first 2 quarters of his final preseason game, a final verdict was somehow settled, and Jay Fiedler had won the starting quarterback job, becoming the first quarterback to start a game for Miami after Dan Marino. So it was decided. Jay Fiedler would be the guy, but it was clear to every warm body that if some world existed where the Dolphins were going to be good in 2000, it would be because of everyone except for Fiedler. And following the 1999 season, the Dolphins went out and finally got what Dan Marino lacked for so long, and that was a feared running back. The only issue was, they did this after Dan Marino was already gone, but regardless, GM Eddie Jones threw a minuscule bag at both the ancient MVP Thurman Thomas, as well as former Saints running back Lamar Smith, both of which obviously had a ton of talent, but in Smith's case, he still had at least a little more in the tank than Thomas did, only being pushed out of New Orleans after they wisely sacrificed their soul for Texas running back Ricky Williams, who will turn out to be a primary character later on. But the defense of Miami was just loaded, and to this day is one of the most underrated single-season units maybe ever, that contains strong contributors like Patrick Surtain Sr. and Tim Bowens, Pro Bowlers and linebackers Zach Thomas, safety Brock Marion, and defensive end Trace Armstrong, as well as all pros in cornerback Sam Madison and the feared defensive end Jason Taylor, who anchored the third-ranked defense in the NFL in 2000 and picked off more passes than any other team in the league. And the defense got started right away, picking up 6 turnovers in week 1 alone and only allowed a singular touchdown through their first 4 weeks, leading Miami to a 3-1 record, including a win versus the eventual Super Bowl champion Baltimore Ravens. Except, although all of this was awesome, with the Fins off to a blazing start, Jay Fiedler was blazing too, just maybe on the wrong grass, because the dude was not good. Simply put, the man was struggling out there, never breaking even 180 passing yards in a single game. But in spite of the quarterback play, the defense continued to carry Fiedler on their shoulders, and going into week 8, the Dolphins were tied for first in the division with the New York Jets. And in this particular week, the Dolphins would go up against that sad sack of a franchise, and seemingly at the time, whoever won this game would pretty much go on to win the division. And as it began, the Dolphins just clobbered the Jets. 30-7 in the fourth quarter. What a statement win. You had Jason Taylor just announcing that the game was over. And why shouldn't he? I know it wasn't technically over, but this game was a slaughtering of their biggest threat in the division, or at least it would have been if they didn't blow the entire game in 1 quarter, allowing Vinny Testaverde to no-huddle his way to tie the game with a fat guy touchdown, 37-37. So, now that the Dolphins had thoroughly blown the game, their only hope was Jay Fiedler, and whether he could overcome a slow fourth quarter to bring Miami back or not. Then the man proceeded to throw a pick, and the Jets fumbled it right back because Jets, and then mere plays later, because the job wasn't finished, Fiedler made all Dolphins fans beg to have Marino back when he threw another interception that led to the Jets kicking a game-winning field goal. Yeah, that just happened. One of the best defenses in the entire league just got charred by Vinny Testaverde in a singular quarter, but because this team was still loaded, they rode the defense and Lamar Smith's 88 yards per game to a 3-game winning streak and went into week 12 with an 8-2 record, only to face the New York Jets again. And if it's even possible, I'd argue this game went even worse than Miami's last matchup with New York, because not only did the Fins lose this game in demoralizing fashion 3-20, but they also lost Jay Fiedler for an undisclosed amount of time due to a pinched nerve in his neck. So now, it was Damon Huard time. The backup, who lost the quarterback battle earlier this year, was announced to be the Dolphins' starting quarterback versus Peyton Manning and the Colts in Week 13, officially making Huard the second quarterback to start after Dan. Obviously, Jay Fiedler wasn't a game changer, but unfortunately, Damon Huard was, as when he filled in for the injured Fiedler before his first start, Huard dropped a truly rare stat line in the loss, throwing 3 picks, 0 touchdowns, and a passer rating of sub-30. So, the expectations were tempered leading into this matchup, but to his credit, the Huard got it done, executing his game manager role flawlessly, leading the Dolphins to a 17-14 win. But once the next week rolled around, Jay Fiedler returned and Damon Huard would never start a game for Miami again, as the Dolphins went 2-2 to end the season and finished the year with an 11-5 record, their best since 1992. Now, waiting in the wild card for the Dolphins and Jay Fiedler was Peyton Manning, but this wasn't the grizzled veteran crusher of worlds Peyton that you've come to know. Instead, this was still an up-and-coming Colts team, and when you throw in some Jay Fiedler action into the mix, what you get is an unreasonably sloppy football game with drops and mistakes everywhere, including 3 first-half interceptions from Fiedler, which led to a 14-0 lead at halftime for Indy. But this game was far from over, and the Dolphins decided, hey, let's maybe not let Jay throw the ball anymore, and handed the ball off to Lamar Smith 40 times. The man had 40 carries in this game, still to this day the most in a single playoff game in NFL history, and he added on 209 yards and 2 scores with that, and still, the Dolphins would have lost this game if the ever-reliable Mike Vanderjagt didn't blow this field goal that might have been tipped to win the game, and allowed Miami to close the game out off of the back of the defense in the run game with a walk-off Lamar Smith touchdown to win it 23-17. So they were back. For the second year in a row, against all odds, The Dolphins were in the divisional round, this time against John Gruden and the Rich Gannon Raiders in Oakland, and the game simply could not have got worse, as they played the wrong team at the wrong time in the wrong place, with the Raiders allowing only 2 touchdowns in their last 15 quarters at home to this point, and they didn't even allow a single point in this game, with Jay Fiedler playing by far the worst game of his Dolphins career to that point, throwing 3 picks, 0 touchdowns, and a sub-30 passer rating, which seems to be a theme for these Dolphins quarterbacks, and Miami was sent home 0-27 in the divisional round. Well, for some reason, it seems as if the Dolphins have just developed some sort of divisional round weakness, because in 3 straight seasons, Miami has now been outscored 10-127 in 3 straight divisional games. How does that even happen? But, well, whatever. It's time to lock and load and prepare for the 2001 season, where, rightfully so, the Dolphins kept pretty much everything the same. They drafted a cornerback in the draft over, Drew Brees, but more on him later. Otherwise, same coach, same coordinator, same defense, and for the sake of this video, the same quarterback, with Jay Fiedler actually showing signs of improvement early on. And even when his play fluctuated as the season went on because he wasn't good, the Dolphins once again logged another 11-5 campaign in a home wildcard game against the defending Super Bowl champion Baltimore Ravens, still led by Rod Woodson, and a ferocious secondary, as well as their, insert he killed 2 people joke here, linebacker, and all-pro Ray Lewis. So, on paper, this team was probably the worst matchup in the league for the good old Fiedler. However, not even on the first possession, but the opening kickoff, the Ravens fumbled straight to Miami to set them up in perfect field position. So here came Jay Fiedler to lead the Dolphins out to a 9-yard drive. And the Dolphins would kick a field goal to go up 3-0 and would never score another point for the rest of the game. The Dolphins gave up 20 unanswered points to allow the NFL's sexiest man, Elvis Grbac, to pick up his first and only playoff win as a starter, and impressively missed out on every opportunity presented to them in this game. And even when they had chances to make plays, this happened. I mean, this man had to be sabotaging on purpose. Alright, whatever. But I guess to stay positive here, at least it wasn't in the divisional round this time, and going into the next offseason, things continued to be pretty quiet. I guess they hired a new offensive coordinator, Norv Turner, and their starting linebacker, Derek Rogers, beat his wife and then hit another dude with a metal chair, but, just normal football activity. Except, since they were set to lose Lamar Smith in the offseason, they needed another Saints running back, obviously, so they decided to go all in right now. The future. Jay Fiedler's the franchise, and we're going to the Super Bowl. So let's throw 2 first-round picks and more to the Saints in exchange for their hyped-up running back, Ricky Williams, in a very, very interesting move. Now, the unusual part about the Ricky Williams trade was, although they technically gave up 2 firsts, their 2003 first they would surrender would turn into a 3rd-round pick unless Ricky Williams ran for over 1,500 yards rushing in a season, which he hasn't even come within 200 yards of due to injuries, so I think Miami will be fine there. Anyways, they had to give away a first. And along with their new piece of jewelry, they also re-signed Jay Fiedler to let everyone know he wasn't going anywhere, and also brought in another quarterback by the name of Ray Lucas from the Jets. And he was useless, but you can probably take a solid guess as to why I'm mentioning him now. Regardless, now we move into the 2002 Dolphins season, where yes, people expected them to still make some noise, but I don't think anyone saw this electric of a 2002 campaign coming, fueled by almost one singular man in particular.
Ricky Williams. And with that run, he's over 100 yards, and boy, a lot more. Look at him go. 20, 10, touchdown.
Ricky was a beast, but not only was Ricky Williams arguably the best running back in the league in 2002, leading the league in rushing yards and attempts, along with some other categories in an ecosystem that had LaDainian Tomlinson and Priest Holmes in their primes, but the team seemed to have everything. The defense hadn't even regressed a little bit. Seriously, it might have even gotten better with experience, this time with Zach Thomas, Jason Taylor, and Patrick Surtain all making all-pro teams, and Sam Madison and Brock Marion were still on top of their games. It was a perfect harmony, but Miami only won 9 games and missed the playoffs. So, let's rewind a bit and let me ask you, who do you suppose was the reason for the Dolphins missing the playoffs this year? Well, it turns out it was this guy, Ray Lucas. My god, he sucked, but we'll get to him in a minute. For now, let me take a minute to pat Jay Fiedler on the back, because from weeks 1 through 6, he not only wasn't the problem, but he was very good. He cut down on mistakes and just did a phenomenal job at being mid. Everything was going according to plan. Miami still had a smothering defense, and the offense led by Ricky Williams was scoring 30 points per game, looking like a Super Bowl favorite. What could have possibly gone wrong? Well, let me take you to Mile High for a mere nibble at what's to come for them. It's week 6 and the Dolphins are taking on the Denver Broncos, and the game went great. Patrick Surtain got a pick 6 and the Dolphins won on a walk-off 53-yard field goal, but a blood toll needed to be paid, and after the game, it was revealed that the Dolphins quarterback Jay Fiedler broke his thumb and missed the Dolphins' next 4 games. So it was now his time to shine. Ray Lucas would take over one of the hottest teams in the NFL and was officially named the starting quarterback of the Dolphins ahead of week 7, becoming the 3rd quarterback to start since Marino. And when he got his first chance, he just drove this unit off the side of the freeway going 90. Just cherish this. In his first game as the guy, he threw 4 picks and then logged 2 more in the next game, and just feast your eyes on these stats. I mean, I smell the work of a prime Nathan Peterman with these numbers. Well done, Ray. Well done. And although Ray picked up his play a little bit, sort of, by the time Jay was back to full strength and ready to start, the deed had already been done. When Fiedler first left the Dolphins, they were 5-1, and now once Ray Lucas dismantled everything, Miami was now 7-5 and on the outside looking in on the playoffs. So from here on out, every game was a must-win if they had playoff hopes. To their credit, though, they got business done, decimating the trash-ass Bears off of a casual 216-yard performance by Ricky Williams, and then took care of the Raiders 23-17. So now, the Dolphins' destiny was in their own control, because every single AFC East team was so close together. All the Finns had to do was either beat the 4-win Minnesota Vikings and or the young Thomas Edward Patrick Brady Jr. Patriots to clinch a playoff spot. That was all that needed to be done. So first up was the Minnesota Vikings, who were bad. This team was playing for absolutely nothing, but still, even though Minnesota was terrible, Dolphins coach Dave Wanstead was not about to let his team become complacent, so in order to motivate the boys, he decided to have a lobster trap just chilling on the Dolphins' locker room roof. Did you hear me? The fuckers hung a lobster trap, a crustacean catcher from the goddamn roof. And the funniest part is, I don't think it could have worked less, because the game looked like it was an easy win for most of it until Randy Moss just took over with a massive bomb from Dante Culpepper and then finished the drive off with a beautiful spin and touchdown pass to take the lead for the Vikings. Minnesota's kicker, Gary Anderson, would then kick a 53-yard field goal to win the game 20-17, but whatever. Miami wouldn't have wanted it any other way, and with a win-in-their-in scenario versus the New England Patriots on the road, when the game began, it was looking great. Ricky Williams was in kill mode, running for 2 touchdowns in the first half, with Miami holding a commanding 21-10 lead at halftime. Well, I know, it's already pretty decently early on in this video, but it's already time to whip one of these bad boys out. A graph that shows every last thing that had to go perfectly wrong in order for the Dolphins to blow this game. First, still holding on to a solid lead, Jay Fiedler overthrew his receiver James McKnight by just a few yards in what would have been a huge touchdown, but it's fine because at least Miami will get a field goal, but I made this graph for a reason, and when Olindo Morteh waddled onto the field, he bricked the 47-yarder wide right. Then, even after getting a turnover, the Dolphins still can't do anything right, because Jason Taylor got a little cute and went over to Tom Brady and gave him a little friendly good job, buddy. That was a terrible pass gesture, and you know, in his defense, Tom had yet to transform into his full form yet, so He didn't know the demon that lurked within. But the snowball effect was already activated, and the Dolphins were the victims to a very iffy pass interference call, which set the Patriots up inside the 5-yard line, where the Patriots, who needed exactly a touchdown and a 2-point conversion, got a touchdown and 2-point conversion. Fabulous. Okay, well, at least there's still time on the clock, so the Dolphins are going to get at least a shot at a drive. Or at least they would have if the Patriots didn't stumble into the perfect kickoff and had the ball almost magnetically stick to the 1-yard line and bounce horizontally to tank any Miami drive. And no, that's still not enough, because the Dolphins proceeded to f***ing shank their punt. A 23-yard punt gave the ball right back to New England, where one field goal was enough to take it to overtime. Then the Patriots won the coin toss, because of course they did, and finally the Dolphins were put to rest when Adam Vinatieri nailed a 35-yard field goal to eliminate the Dolphins from the playoffs. What a meltdown. The Miami Dolphins, one of the most talented teams in the entire NFL, failed to even make the playoffs and couldn't even beat two teams at the end of the season that didn't even make the playoffs either. So going into 2003, not only was the clock ticking, but it was about to explode. This so-called core left behind from Dan Marino's time was aging rapidly. Jason Taylor was 29, Zach Thomas was 30, Brock Marion was 33, Sam Madison was almost 30, and the Dolphins only added on to their elderly gentleman pile by trading for the 34-year-old Junior Seau, giving up only a future 5th-round pick in the process, which seemed useless at the time, but would later be used to draft future All-Pro running back Michael Turner, who definitely could have helped them out after some future unexpected events occurred. Anyways, this team just didn't make any moves. They signed Broncos quarterback Brian Griese, who, other than contributing to the cauldron of 25 mistakes, he's only notable because his dad was one of the only other quarterbacks besides Marino who did anything for this organization, and with Fiedler and Wanstead looking like they weren't going anywhere, once again, this team just refused to go out and grab some star power and had another boring-ass offseason where all that happened was another Dolphin getting arrested for allegedly harassing his girlfriend. So with that, boy am I excited for another season of Jay Fiedler at quarterback. But hey, to start the year, the season was almost a mirror image of 2002. The Dolphins started out pretty hot, going 4-1 through the first 6 weeks, with Fiedler's play not being super inspiring, but hey, as we know, it can always get worse. Much, much worse. And then, as per the script, Jay Fiedler got injured. So in came backup quarterback Brian Griese, becoming the 4th quarterback to start after Daniel Marino. And in his first game, it went perfectly. Seriously, a laser-efficient near 200 yards and 3 touchdowns with no picks? Oh my lord, Miami, hold on. You got yourselves a quarterback. I guess you don't even need Jay Fiedler anymore with how... I mean, I'm not surprised, but yeah, it turns out Brian Griese ain't all that, and he completely fell back down to earth, dropping 2 putrid sub-40 passer rating games, but for what it's worth, it was slightly less unwatchable than Ray Lucas, and they actually had a winning record, primarily due to the Dolphins' defense, now led by the scariest sack duo in the league, with Jason Taylor and Adwale Ogunleye, both of which were top 4 sack leaders this season, with Taylor getting in 13 and Ogunleye with 15. So hey, maybe just like last year, Jay Fiedler could return and save everyone. And once again, the same thing happened, except with a little curveball this time, because the Fiedler of men played the greatest game he's ever played in his life, in his first healthy game back versus the Cowboys, leading the team to 40 points and a near-perfect passer rating, but he used up all his juice in that one game, and the Fiedler completely fell back to his usual game manager ways, and unfortunately, the Dolphins just became victims to a tough schedule, needing to win at least 3 of the last 4 remaining games, but losing to the 14-win Patriots and 12-win Eagles was nothing to be ashamed of, especially when your quarterback combines for 0 touchdowns and 4 picks over that 2-game stretch, and after winning the last 2 games of the year, the Dolphins finished the 2003 season underperforming again with another absurdly loaded defense, this time throwing up a 10-6 record. And to dig that knife a little bit deeper, this year, in 2003, 10 wins just wasn't going to cut it anymore, with the Patriots now blossoming and other teams like the Titans, Colts, and Chiefs all winning 12-plus games. The AFC just ran out of spots to hand out, and just like that, the Miami Dolphins failed to make the playoffs for their second straight season. Brutal. Miami has just been utterly wasting an all-time great defense and now a star running back, and things started off on the wrong note when the Dolphins had to watch both Ogunleye and their star safety of the last half-decade in Brock Marion walk, but if there was any foul taste left in Dolphins fans' mouths, it was immediately washed away when he returned. Dan Marino was coming back, but this time, he would be joining the front office, becoming the senior vice president of football operations before 2004. Finally, a guy in the office that really knows Dolphins football, and even better, it's Dan Marino. He used to throw a football. It's gonna be great. Although his arm is beyond he's still got that same burning passion to win that ever-elusive Super Bowl ring he never got, and announced to the media that he's fully prepared to give everything he has. Then he quit 3 weeks later. Alright, well, that sucks. I'm not gonna lie to you, that was pretty rough, but although this Dolphins team has, yes, a weaker defense, they still have Ricky Williams, and a career renaissance looks all but inevitable in Miami for the former 5th overall pick, and he is going... He retired. What? Well, it turns out Ricky Williams' sudden change of heart had actually been months, if not years in the making. The dude was just burnt out after leading the league in carries for 2 seasons in a row, and add on constant injuries as well as a passion for pushing and or hitting the gas, and what you get is a relatively plausible reason for an early retirement. Now, from the Dolphins front office perspective though, they were not satisfied with this whatsoever. They all assumed that since Ricky Williams had a bit of a weed issue, the f***er was just gonna take the year off, chiefing in his basement all day, and from an investment standpoint, giving up 2 first-round picks for just 2 seasons of service isn't the greatest look. So if Ricky truly was gone, then head coach Dave Wanstead and GM Eddie Jones both had forest fires brewing under their derrieres, and to stoke that fire even more, Ricky Williams from the future would actually comment on the state of the Dolphins organization at the time, and he wasn't exactly super positive.
And then stuff was going on in the Dolphins organization. It was just a mess. And so I just read the writing on the wall of saying the universe is telling me it's time to do something different.
Simply put, the walls were caving in at an alarming rate. And even worse, just a few days before Ricky announced he was retiring, the last couple of serviceable running backs on the market in Eddie George and Antoine Smith both officially signed deals, so now Miami was left with pseudo-fullback Sammy Morris and Travis Homer to try and fill the black hole left behind by the 5'10", 230-pound back. But other than that, you should be experienced enough to know how the rest of this offseason went. The Dolphins traded for another quarterback, this time in A.J. Feely, had another player beat their girlfriend. They really needed to do something about that. And now, after all of that lunacy was over, the Dolphins would go into the 2004 season, and somehow this season was so much worse than just a regular nightmare campaign for Miami. Yeah, you know, all things considered, this season went pretty well. In just their first game of the season. In game number 1, Jay Fiedler found himself benched at halftime after putting up a masterclass of a performance, and since that sentiment was kept going into week 2, that made Dolphins quarterback A.J. Feely the 5th quarterback to start after the Marino, and guess what? Feely was just utter shit too, and after finding themselves at 1-8 following a loss to the Arizona Cardinals, Dave Wanstead knew it was over and made it quick and painless for himself, falling on his own sword to avoid further pain, resigning as the team's head coach. And for the rest of this depressing season, Fiedler and Feely took turns losing games until by the time the final week of the season rolled around, both quarterbacks had been ruled out for the season with injuries, and the 3rd-string quarterback by the name of Sage Rosenfels became the 6th quarterback to start a game for Miami after the Coke Man, and the 3rd to start this season. And of course, he threw 3 picks to help the Dolphins cap off a devastating 4-12 season. Things were getting bad. It was time to clean house, scrub the bacteria away from a past era, and just move on. And then the seventh domino, or whatever, crumbled when GM Eddie Jones retired. So with the head coaching position still vacant, those two old men were replaced with shiny new Lamborghinis with former Saints general manager Randy Mueller to grab the GM spot, and a certain former national championship winning head coach would come and take over the main job in Miami. Nicholas Saban. Yep, he's here now, and we'll get more into him over these next 2 years, but we still need to finish this offseason off first. So with the team hiring Nick Saban, they used their second overall pick they got from putting in a fantastic awful season to draft Auburn running back sensation Ronnie Brown. And for more damage projected to come from this backfield, Miami was also set to get none other than Ricky Williams back, who got a little bored of blazing all day, I guess, except he was set up to be suspended for the first 4 games of the season, so it would at least take a little bit for him to knock the rust off. So you heard me, new coach, new running back, and a new GM, but the most important part of this Dolphins team is that Jay Fiedler was finally gone. Oh, he's actually gone. They finally got rid of him. He was banished to the gates of hell to repay for all of the mental damage he caused Miami and would never be seen again in the NFL after 1 season. And now, going into the future, under Nick Saban, the Miami Dolphins would finally be getting a new franchise quarterback. That man would be Gus. Gustavo Farrat, a guy approaching his age 34 season who hadn't been a consistent starter since 1997 and is best known for somehow finding a way to give himself a concussion after a touchdown and slamming his head against a concrete wall like he was the Hulk. I mean, I don't get it, but they must have seen something in Gus, like a hidden superpower or something waiting to be unleashed, because remember, instead of taking a quarterback in the 2005 NFL draft like I don't know, just throwing some names out there, like Jason Campbell, who was pretty solid for a minute there, or yeah, we're not going to get into that alternative timeline because the future of the Miami Dolphins is all about Gus. Who cares about Aaron Rodgers? They don't need him. They got Gustavo. And to begin the 2005 season, of course, because he was the only quarterback medically classified as alive on the roster, Gus Farrat became the 7th quarterback to start after you-know-who. And against all the odds, Gus actually had a bad year. Can you believe it? He had the 2nd lowest passer rating in the league, and maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the franchise guy. I mean, that's pretty taboo for me to say, and in his first season on the job, Nick Saban's boys were not looking good, sitting at a 3-7 record, completely out of the playoff race. But wait, because the Dolphins actually started rallying, and the key to their success was a sprinkle of solid plays by Gustavo, but mainly, it was the same guys who have kept this team from being the worst franchise in football for the last 5 years. The entire defense and Ricky Williams. And although the year was literally just over by week 11, the Fins won their final 6 games of the season to finish with a more than respectable 9-7 record, especially within the context of this being Nick Saban's first year. And even more promising for fans, in the final 3 games of the season, Ricky Williams seemed to go right back to his all-pro form and ran for well over 100 yards per game. So to be honest, the future was looking damn near very bright. And to make sure everything stayed on course, it was imperative that the Dolphins got their quarterback situation figured out after realizing that Gus wasn't the answer. And luckily, the Dolphins got to decide between 2 huge free agent quarterbacks, both coming off of very serious injuries, but that's what you get for the discount. And these 2 quarterbacks were former Vikings Pro Bowler Dante Culpepper and former Chargers quarterback Drew Brees. And whoever the Dolphins would pick would obviously be monumental, and they went with, well, I mean, you already know the answer, because, yeah. They chose Dante Culpepper, and this is where things get a little dicey, because it was reported that Nick Saban had issues with the Fins front office regarding payments and what players were brought in, and at the same time, the front office had problems with Saban too, and the way he went about things. So even when the Dolphins were the favorites to land Brees early on, it all came crumbling down when Drew Brees failed his physical with Miami's personal doctors. which on the surface is somewhat fair because Brees was still clearly not 100%, but according to Saban himself, things were a lot more surefire than originally believed. He said that not only was Drew leaning towards Miami, but he had a verbal agreement with Drew's agent, so as long as he didn't exactly fail his physical, then Drew Brees would have been a Miami Dolphin. From Saban's own words, the organization wanted Culpepper and he wanted Brees. So when the Dolphins went ahead and brought in Culpepper anyway and watched Brees go do things with the Saints, Saban was furious, believing the Dolphins failed his physical on purpose and at that very moment lost any remaining faith he had in the Dolphins front office. But the offseason wasn't even over yet because Ricky Williams seemingly found a way to smoke himself out of the league, losing his appeal and now had to serve a season-long suspension. So while Ricky went to go play in Canada, meanwhile in Miami, even after trying to fix things, it was still the same old story. The defense led by none other than Zach Thomas and the eventual Defensive Player of the Year Jason Taylor carried the Dolphins, while offensive weapons like Ronnie Brown, who ran for 1,000 yards without Ricky in just 13 games, Chris Chambers, and Wes Welker, who, yes, was on this team, were all simply held back by a lack of consistent quarterback play all year long. The 2006 season began with Dante Culpepper starting the first 4 games, and then he ripped his right knee into microscopic pieces, so in came quarterback Joey Harrington, who they traded a 7th-round pick for, who would fill in and start every game for the remainder of the season, except for the last, where another quarterback by the name of Cleo Lemon would get that final start, making these 3 disappointments the 8th, 9th, and 10th quarterbacks to start a game for Miami, still just 6 years after Dan Marino retired. Now, the reason I skipped over this season so quickly, besides to keep whatever's left of the Dolphins fans that are watching this video's sanity still intact, is this season really just presented nothing new or interesting. Just another wasted Miami season, except for one thing. The one semi-bright spot on this roster was the model of perfection in Coach Saban. He had his flaws, sure, treated the players like college athletes, yeah, and nearly got into fights with Culpepper and Zach Thomas, and ignored a man who collapsed in the fucking hallway. Fine, I'll give you that, but he was better than Dave Wanstead, at least. I don't know, people's girlfriends weren't getting beaten up at as high of rates, but despite all of that, he was, still employed by the Dolphins, and other teams seemed to ignore that fact anyways, and displayed interest in Saban's services to bolster his coaching prowess, with the most notable example being Alabama football, who had recently moved on from a few head coaches and wondered if Saban might want to return to a more familiar league, but Nick made sure that rumor was shut down instantly.
I don't know how else I can say it, guys. I've said it 3 different occasions. Well, then I guess I have to say it. I'm not going to be the Alabama coach. I think I've said this over and over and over again.
Well, that's assuring. It's good to know that even after a really rough 6-10 season where pretty much nothing went right for them, that this Bill Belichick clone was just going to stick around, and even when things got a little rocky, he was going to have his back to the wall and never give in to an offer like this.
Great pleasure to introduce the next coach of the Crimson Tide, Nick Saban.
4 days. 4 days after the 2006 Dolphin season ended, the crusty slithered his ass off to Alabama, leaving the entire Dolphins organization in utter discombobulation. Just a disaster. And that is what it takes for an organization to reach their lowest point. Because I've never seen a singular franchise just consciously punting an entire season before it began, more than the 2007 Dolphins. They brought in Joey Porter to waste his talents for this year at least, as well as quarterbacks Trent Green and John Beck to complement backup Cleo Lemon, or at least that was the plan, but eventually Trent Green was announced as the starter, and to be honest, it's not even worth your time to mention anyone else here. This team was the definition of a one-year rental. It's just deja vu. I almost feel like the Dolphins were aware of their alarmingly high quarterback starting number since 2000 and just tried to pad their stats, because Trent Green started the first 5 games before splitting his head in 2. Then Cleo Lemon came back in for a few games before he was benched for rookie quarterback John Beck, who would never play a game again for the Dolphins after the season, as these 3 helped Miami to win 1 game this season. their worst record in franchise history, with Green and Beck becoming the 11th and 12th guys to start after Marino. And just to make sure the Dolphins had zero fun this season, let's throw in some major injuries to both Ronnie Brown and Zach Thomas to end their seasons by week 7. Alright, moving on. Let's forget that year ever happened, and it's now only appropriate that after a year like that, the 2008 Dolphins would become true contenders in maybe being the weirdest single-season team ever, because after pretty much 3+ seasons of not playing football, finally, Ricky Williams was coming back to the NFL at the crisp age of 31, and rightfully so. Nobody knew what to expect from him, especially with Ronnie Brown still on the team, and even odder, for the first time since 1997, when Marino was still here, both of their all-pros in Zach Thomas and Jason Taylor were not going to be holding down the defensive side of the ball, finding themselves in Washington and Dallas respectively, and that's not even considering the fact that the Dolphins just fired everyone. So, to just take a minute to look at all these new faces, because everyone was new, but most importantly, just know their head coach Tony Sparano and offensive coordinator Dan Henning were going to have some wild ideas. Those ideas are going to have to wait though, because the Dolphins went to grab the most talented quarterback they could, signing whatever was left of the absurdly injury-prone Chad Pennington, and also drafted, well, for the first time since arguably drafting Ronnie Brown, and even that's a stretch, but the Dolphins brought in a good player in future All-Pro tackle Jake Long, and now it was time for the 2008 Dolphins season to begin, and a couple weeks before the season, Chad Pennington was named the Week 1 starter, becoming the 13th starter since the powdered pocket passer, and for the first time since 2001, Miami would miraculously have one quarterback start for them for the entire season. I don't even know where to start in describing the season, but I guess to give you some idea of what the Dolphins were this year, they basically just spammed the Wildcat. Because of their coaching staff's college background and the fact that they had two big sweaty men in the backfield, they thought, hey, f*** it. Let's see how this goes. And behind Ricky, Ronnie, and Chad, the Miami Dolphins ran their way through the NFL once they got their formation cooking, winning 9 of their last 10 games to win the division with an 11-win season. The Dolphins had broken the Matrix, and nobody could stop the Wildcat, except for some actually good defenses, like the New England Patriots, who got destroyed by the Wildcat earlier this year, but once they matched up against them again, they completely neutered their crafty little scheme. So, when they were set to face off against the number 3 ranked defense in the league in the Baltimore Ravens in the wild card, this game was going to go one of two ways. Either the Wildcat was going to remain near unbeatable, or Ray Lewis and Ed Reed were going to stop that from happening pretty much single-handedly. Now, here was the problem. The Wildcat is a run play, and when do you not draw up a run play? When you're getting blown the f*** out. And in this game, the Dolphins were getting blown the f*** out for the entire second half in this game. And I wasn't being entirely serious when I said Ed Reed and Ray Lewis were going to stop Miami by themselves, but I mean, they pretty much did. Along with the rest of the dogs in the Baltimore defense, they made Miami look out of place for even being in the wild card in the first place, forcing Chad Pennington into his worst game of the season, sacking him 3 times, forcing a fumble, and getting 4 interceptions off the man, one resulting in an Ed Reed pick 6 to annihilate Miami 27-9 in their first postseason appearance since their last playoff loss to the Ravens in 2001. And just like last time, when the Dolphins are knocked down, boy, it takes them a while to get back up. And both the 2009 and 2010 seasons were just the definition of forgettable. Not overly humiliating like 2007 or fun like 2008, but just boring, as the team logged back-to-back 7-9 seasons with Chad Pennington's career succumbing to injuries, which, hey, guess what? Forced the one and only fellow Chad, this time Chad Henne, to start 27 games for Miami during this time period, as well as Tyler Thigpen, a former Chiefs quarterback who only ever started 1 game for Miami in 2010, to make these two the 14th and 15th quarterbacks for Miami to start a decade after Dan just gave up. And unfortunately, 2011 brought more of the same. This team just threw as much the wall as they could and prayed that some of it stuck, with Jason Taylor coming back for one last ride, and they also were rostering the fossiled remains of Larry Johnson, signed backup quarterback Matt Moore, and traded for both Reggie Bush and Brandon Marshall to try and rekindle some semblance of fun from the Ricky Williams and Ronnie Brown era. But if there was going to be fun had in 2011, it was actually going to come from losing, because with Chad Henne going down and Matt Moore replacing him, becoming the 16th quarterback to start since Dan, the Dolphins had a goal for this season, and that goal was suck for luck, baby. Hell yes! And it was all going according to plan. Through week 8, the Dolphins were the worst team in football at 0-7, and with Matt Moore being Matt Moore, it looked like this team might even top their unprecedented one-win campaign from 2007. And you know, even if they somehow win a few games, the second overall pick in 2012 wouldn't be a bad consolation prize either, with both Stanford's Andrew Luck and Baylor's Robert Griffin III both being the undisputed number 1 and 2 overall picks. All the Dolphins had to do was just, not randomly turn their season around in the middle of the year, and all will be well. Why? Look, I know the players and coaches are never going to try and lose on purpose, and for Tony Sperano, it didn't even matter, because the man got fired after week 14 anyways, and now they were going to piss away another opportunity for a franchise quarterback. They had already blown Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, and others, constantly plugging the quarterback position with filler, and now instead of a top 2 pick, they were projected to draft 8th overall. Now, here's the thing. The Dolphins were just in dire need of a quarterback still, so although the tier drop-off between Andrew Luck, RG3, and everyone else was massive, most mock drafts had the Dolphins reaching on talent and prioritizing fit, and taking the Texas A&M wide receiver turned quarterback project by the name of Ryan Tannehill. And if the Dolphins went through with this projected plan, then they would actually have a franchise quarterback. But come on, this is the Dolphins. They'll probably just take Trent Richardson or something. But with the 8th overall pick, they finally did it. They actually drafted Ryan Tannehill. The drought was over. Even if Tannehill just blew ass for 4 years, it didn't matter. The Miami Dolphins had used a first-round pick to draft a quarterback for the first time since 1983, when they took a young kid by the name of Dan Marino. But like I said, Tannehill was still seen as a project, and was set up to be behind Matt Moore for the 2012 season to let him develop. More on that in a minute, but now let's take some time to really get to know these new-look Dolphins. First of all, we got a new head coach in town, in Joe Philbin, the former offensive coordinator of the Packers who just helped a guy named Aaron Rodgers win stuff, and now maybe he can do the same here. But a proclaimed offensive genius can only do so much with an offense like this one, whose wide receiver 1 was set up to be Brian Hartline, and I don't know, maybe Devon Bess, because now with future All-Pro wide receiver Brandon Marshall traded, they were quite literally the only men to throw to. But on defense, the Dolphins rebuilt surprisingly quickly, with a team featuring many young up-and-comers with Sean Smith, Rashad Jones, Olivier Vernon, as well as solidified stars with Randy Starks, and the heartbeat of the defense in All-Pro defensive end Cameron Wake. Wow, who would have guessed it? The defense is near great, and the offense is terrible. Unbelievable. And after an offseason headlined by the Dolphins signing and then cutting Chad Ochocinco because he was arrested for hitting his wife, the rest of the downtime was used to focus on the quarterback battle between Matt Moore and Ryan Tannehill, because although Tannehill wasn't supposed to sit out for the year, remember, Matt Moore is bad, and shockingly, still multiple weeks before their first game, Ryan Tannehill was named the official starter for Week 1. So the Ryan Tannehill era was going to begin much sooner than anyone could have ever anticipated, and he would become the 17th quarterback to start after Dan Marino, and the last one to start for them for a few years. So here's the thing. From 2012 through 2015, Ryan Tannehill was the guy, and no other quarterback started a single game during that time period. And once again, no quarterback had done that for Miami since Dan Marino, but Ryan Tannehill was not Dan Marino, but that was okay. And still, with the little weapons he had around him, Ryan did his best with what he had, even while his coaching staff had no clue what they were doing, and his offensive line tried to kill him, allowing the most sacks on a quarterback by a wide margin during this 4-year period, while they were, I guess, a little bit too busy focusing on their bullying scandal. Tannehill was never a Pro Bowl level guy to this point, but he was just on the outside looking in, and if just for 1 year the team could be stable around Ryan Tannehill, then maybe this team could go on a run. And for the 2016 season, that sort of happened, and even with Adam Gase now being the head coach, and with a still beyond awful offensive line that got even worse when their Pro Bowl center Mike Pouncey went down with a season-ending hip injury, that didn't stop the Dolphins from having a remarkable season by their standards, led by the star play of their top 3 offensive weapons in the 1,000-yard rusher Jay Ajayi, Pro Bowl receiver Jarvis Landry, and of course the man who actually brought stability to the quarterback position in Ryan Tannehill. Everything was going pretty damn well. The Dolphins weren't exactly Super Bowl contenders, but they were 6-1 in their last 7 games, and now went into a matchup against the struggling Arizona Cardinals to see if they could boost their spot in the power rankings. And they did exactly that, but the football gods are cruel, and for a payment to make up for the Dolphins actually having a good year, they demanded a sacrifice. And with the Dolphins holding a multiple score lead, they snatched Ryan Tannehill's ACL, which would end Ryan's most productive season as a member of the Miami Dolphins on the spot. And without Ryan, in came the now 32-year-old Matt Moore once again. And without Tannehill back, their offensive line looked even worse than before, if that was even possible, getting destroyed in the wildcard 30-12 by the Steelers, as they forced Matt Moore into 5 sacks and 3 total turnovers in that game. So the best Dolphins season in forever went out in just a sad wildcard showing, and to pile on the agony, Ryan Tannehill decided to not instantly do surgery on his ACL and instead decided to try to do stem cell therapy and rehab to heal it, which absolutely did not work at all. And during practice in the offseason, his knee broke again and was now forced to go in for surgery. But this time, his late decision would cost him the entire 2017 Dolphins season on top of that. So with Tannehill down, the Finns needed a replacement quarterback. But since his newest injury happened in August of 2017, just like Ricky Williams' early retirement, the Dolphins were forced to just scrape up whoever was left, and with the help of Adam Gase, they convinced Jay Cutler to come out of his brief retirement and do the one thing he wanted to do less than anything in the world, and that was play quarterback. Woohoo! Yeah, Jay Cutler's here now. Great. And, you know, with Tannehill's injury and Jay Cutler now being the starting quarterback, I almost felt inclined to call these the new dark years for the Dolphins. But, I mean, let's be honest here. Outside of a few standalone seasons, we've been in the dark years for 15 years now, and now with Jay Cutler becoming the 18th starting quarterback since Dan Marino, this entire Miami season was just a regression across the board. And shockingly, Jay Cutler was dreadful. Jay Ajayi reverted back to his mortal form, and for a very rare time period, the Dolphins' defense became one of the worst in the entire NFL this year, headlined by their 0-40 smothering at the hands of the Ravens again. And somehow, it just continues to get worse and worse. The tunnel of despair just never ends, as to begin 2018, the initial plan was to stick with Ryan Tannehill to start the year, a safe bet with him playing very well the last time he was on the field, and the man promptly rewarded Miami with a godly 3-game stretch to start the season, where he was passing for almost 230 yards a game, had a passer rating of 121.8, which would have led the league, and had a 3-0 record, but then he got hurt. Again, but don't worry, the Dolphins had a backup plan. Over the offseason, they signed former Broncos prodigy Brock Osweiler to be the backup. So when Tannehill was injured in Week 5, in came Brock Osweiler to be the 19th quarterback to start after Ryan Tannehill, and by the time Ryan came back, the Dolphins' best-case scenario was another 10-win season and subsequent wildcard exit. But that didn't happen. Even with the Miami Miracle, the Dolphins finished 7-9 and missed the playoffs. I mean, it was just clear. Things needed to change. And credit to Adam Gase for burning his reputation to the ground while with Miami, because he got fired. And then the Fins finally accepted that the Ryan Tannehill experiment just didn't go the way they had planned and shipped him off to Tennessee, where he would instantly have a career renaissance with a competent team put around him. But to stick here in Miami, they hired a new head coach in Brian Flores, and hey, they brought in Ryan Fitzpatrick and Josh Rosen for cannon fodder. Nice. And those two were brought in to do one thing: lose. Because in an eerily similar situation to the 2011 Dolphins team, instead of suck for luck, the new slogan for this Miami season was tank for Tua. And just like in 2011, the Dolphins started out the year by losing their first 7 games and sitting with a 0-win total. The number 1 pick seemed to be all but theirs. But unlike 2007, in this season, they wanted to make 100% sure that they had almost no talent left on the entire roster. So before the year, they chose to not re-sign running back Frank Gore, defensive end Cameron Wake, and traded away the aforementioned Ryan Tannehill and Robert Quinn, as well as former first-round pick Laramie Tunsil. Now, because that still wasn't enough to satisfy them, they also traded away their young star safety Minkah Fitzpatrick and their starting running back Kenyon Drake to really solidify things if they weren't already set in stone. So, both Ryan Fitzpatrick and Josh Rosen became the 20th and 21st quarterbacks to start after Dan Marino, and shockingly, didn't turn into franchise guys. But meanwhile, literally just like in 2011, the Dolphins found a way to not even lose correctly, because out of nowhere, Fitzpatrick revived this team from the casket, and along with a 1,000-yard season from Devontae Parker, the Dolphins rallied to finish the season with a meaningless 5-11 record, now being less than proud owners to the 5th overall pick in the 2020 draft. Now, this was obviously disappointing because the number 1 pick would have been pretty sweet, but in a shocking development in the college world, LSU quarterback Joe Burrow shot up mock drafts and was now projected to be almost unanimously the 1st overall selection. And with New York, Washington, and Detroit all projected to not take quarterbacks due to their current situations, oh my god, it actually somehow worked out. And with the 5th overall pick in the 2020 NFL draft, the Dolphins made the tough decision to draft Alabama quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, giving the Dolphins a second chance at a franchise quarterback. So, it was time to see what Tua was made of, and luckily, the Dolphins learned at least a little from their time with Tannehill and gave Fitzpatrick the starting job for the first few games. But eventually, the Dolphins got a little impatient and decided to bench Ryan Fitzpatrick, and in Week 8, Tua was set to make his first ever start in the NFL, becoming the 22nd quarterback to start since Dan Marino. And once he got handed the starting job, shockingly, things immediately went very, very well. It was looking like Tua was that guy, winning his first 3 starts, playing efficient football without throwing a single interception. But as will unfortunately become a theme with Tua, he got hurt, and when he came back, he was noticeably a little off for the rest of the season. But thanks to the heroics of Ryan Fitzpatrick, who came in to replace a bench Tua, the Dolphins managed to enter a Week 17 matchup with the Buffalo Bills, who rested their starters for the entire second half for a chance at the playoffs. All they had to do was win this game, and they would be in the postseason. And which quarterback would they be rolling with in this all-important game? Well, in a controversial decision, Brian Flores announced Tua as the Dolphins' starting quarterback, meaning if the Dolphins were going to make the playoffs, it was going to be because of their rookie quarterback. And unfortunately for Miami, as per usual, it all went to shit.
Barkley to the air on 1st and 10, and he's got him! Davis, what a catch! Touchdown, Buffalo!
They just got dunked on. They allowed 56 points to a team that was half quarterbacked by Matt Barkley. And the Dolphins missed the playoffs again, this time with a 10-6 record. But at least one thing was clear: Tua is the future of the Miami Dolphins. And over the next 2 seasons, Miami put up identical 9-8 campaigns, literally mirror images of their 2013 and 14 seasons, as Tua continued to struggle with injuries, leaving the door open for a ton of backup QBs to continue to pad this sorry-ass stat as a combination of Jacoby Brissett, who started 5 games, Teddy Bridgewater, who started 2 games, and Skylar Thompson, who started twice, finally polished off this list of the failed 25 quarterbacks to start a game in the 23 years and counting after Dan Marino retired, and man, it has been a journey. A long, grueling, and agonizing one, and still to this day, the Dolphins haven't won a playoff game since 2000. But, you know, if you're able to block out some terrible memories, maybe the bleeding was worth it. Because with Mike McDaniel and Tua running the show in 2023, they have by far the most explosive offense in the league. While at the time of the making of this video, Tua is second in the NFL in MVP voting. So through all 25 guys, from Jay Fiedler to Dante Culpepper, Ryan Tannehill, Cleo Lemon, and even Tua, all the guys at least had their moments, but they all unfortunately share one common thing. None of them have yet to come close to even touching the man who came before all of them. Anyways, if you like this video, then subscribe, because I got a lot of videos on the channel just like this one, and I'm going to show all the Patreons on the screen, like right here or up there or something, I don't know. But if you want to support me, the Patreon's in the description. It's only $1, but I don't know. Do it if you want, no pressure whatsoever. And if you like this video, then watch this video right here where I went over the misery of the Chargers franchise. It's pretty good, trust me. But anyways, until next time.